Night was not empty that evening. The sky held a slow, cold silence. The two small moons moved like quiet clocks. Then a thin light cut that silence. It grew and grew until the light became a shape. People on the coast stopped what they were doing. Children ran out of houses. Old men left their chairs and looked up. The shadow came down like a bird made of steel. It was not alone. One by one, more shadows crossed the stars. They moved in lines like long fish. Each shadow had hard edges. Each showed bright plates and seams. Against the dark, the ships looked heavy and true. They did not hide. On the sand, a small boat came ashore. The waves pushed it gently. A woman stepped out first. She wore a worn uniform and a thin coat. Her face had lines from wind and sun. Her voice was soft but steady. She held a small flag. The flag was old. It had the blue of earth and a faded symbol. The cloth flapped like a tired heart. Behind the woman came other people. Some were thin, and some were broad. Some had children who had never seen these stars close. Old men walked slowly, careful of their steps. A few carried boxes tied tight with rope. A young engineer had a bundle of metal wrapped in cloth. They moved as if they had always known this place, though many had never stood on this shore before. They did not shout. They did not bring loud machines. They walked with quiet that felt like a promise. The townspeople stood very still. Dogs barked a little and then fell silent. Radios in small houses clicked and hummed. For a long minute, no one spoke. The sea wrapped the landing in sound. The woman raised the flag. Her hand did not shake. She looked at the people on the beach and at the sky where the ships hung. "We are home," she said. The words were simple. Her voice was not loud, but it reached many ears. The phrase moved like a small bell through the town. People repeated it, unsure. Some cried softly. Some fell to their knees. Far away, behind curved windows of glass and light, metal towers blinked. In rooms made of brass and woven glass, strangers listened. A thin line of signal moved across space. It was small and raw. The message read, in a plain code, "We are home." The message reached a place that did not use bodies. It reached a council of glass and bone and sound. The council rooms hummed. Makers sat in rings of light. They were not like the people on the shore. Their skin shone with patterns. Their voices had many notes. When the message came, their faces shifted like stones. One of the council said, "They are back." "After all this time," another voice answered, "they are weak and strange. They carry old things." But a short voice, cold and flat, said, "Do not assume. The lost know more than memory." The room turned quiet like a held breath. Closer to the shore, the colonists opened a crate. Men and women worked with careful hands. They did not waste a sound. The crates held steel plates, small engines, thin frames, and tools that fit like keys into one another. The steel was dark and heavy. It had marks that told stories. A child reached out to touch a plate. It was cold, smooth, and hummed in a strange way. The child did not pull back. A local scientist arrived with a small team. He wore glasses and a neat coat. He asked many calm questions. The colonists answered with calm words and careful smiles. They did not give the scientist the plates. He asked to study the metal. They said no. The scientist tried to hide his worry. That night he walked to the cliff and held the small plate in his hands. He felt a small light move under his fingers. He looked into the dark sea and did not know what to think. At the same time, a hidden camera on a low rock caught a slow shape. It showed a thin frame that did not belong to the town. Someone carrying the frame walked toward the cliffs where the waves hit hard stones. The night air was thin and bright. The person moved without hurry. He stepped close to the open sea and set the metal down. Hands worked fast and quiet. The frame fit into a round thing in the water. The camera lost the image in a salt spray. The picture froze, and then the feed ended. The camera was far from the town center. It belonged to a small watch group who kept eyes on sea and sky. They sent a note to the nearest port. The note was small. It said simply, "Strange, build on, cliff, unknown steel." Someone read the note and set it aside. The note found its way into a drawer and then into a pile of other messages. The town was busy with lunches and waves and the slow work of the colonists, but not all messages were ignored. A small sensor left in the sand by a curious boy blinked. It sent a soft pulse into the long night. The pulse rode on a carrier wave and left the planet. Far beyond the moons and the towns, a watch ship hummed. Its lights turned blue. In a command hall, a face leaned over a screen and saw the pulse. Hands moved. On the screen, a small red dot began to glow. Back on the beach, the woman who came first looked at children playing under new metal frames. She thought of why they left and why they had come back. She felt both fear and hard peace. The ships above breathed like sleeping beasts. The town around her smelled of salt and old bread. She thought of the flags that had been carried in secret for years. She thought of lessons that had been learned in far places. Her eyes met those of a young man who stood near a crate. He had a small smile, not cruel, not kind. It was the smile of one who knew how to keep a quiet plan. Far away, in the Council of Glass, the leaders spoke again. Their voices cut like thin glass. The message from the shore was short. It said, simply, "We are home." The council read it, and then read the signs, the frames, the steel, the pulse. One voice said slowly, "They have more than memory." Another answered, "Then prepare." On the cliff, a metal plate caught the pale moonlight. It shone like a small warning. In the waves below, something moved slowly and hid. The first night of their return ended with more questions than answers. The town slept, and the ships above watched. The world had changed a little that night. They had returned with steel. They had returned with weight. They had returned with a promise that the stars would notice. The machines woke like animals under a cold moon. At first, they made small noises, clicks, soft breaths of steam, and the slow hum of gears. Men and women pulled lids from crates and set metal pieces on wooden tables. The town watched with wide eyes. Children crept close and then ran back when a small engine started to spin. The engines were small, but they moved with a clear purpose. The colonists did not rush. They worked in quiet teams. Hands knew where to fit each bolt. A woman with short hair set a tiny disc into a hollow, and the disc glowed like a small star. An old man wiped his hands on his coat and smiled. He had built things like this long ago. He moved with calm skill. Around him, people felt safe and afraid at the same time. Word spread fast. Traders came in small boats and bigger ships. Merchants brought silk and spices, and they asked to see the machines. Their faces showed hope and hunger. They offered money, goods, safe routes, and soft promises. A man with a loud voice and a bright hat stepped forward. He spoke of trade routes and new markets. He praised the colonists and said, "Share your tools. We will all grow rich." Then a diplomatic ship arrived. It hung above the town like a slow moon. The ship lowered a small boat. Men in strange clothes stepped down. Their garments were smooth and embroidered with thin wires that flashed, now and then. They moved with careful steps and polite smiles. They brought a message. The nearest power wanted friendship. They wanted trade and a pact. They thanked the colonists for returning to their rightful place. The colonists welcomed them with plain words. They ate and talked in calm tones. They did not drink the wine offered. They did not sign quick papers. When asked about the steel plates, the colonist leader, the woman from the shore, spoke slowly. "We will share what helps life," she said. "We will keep the rest." She looked at the diplomats with soft but steady eyes. The diplomats smiled, but their eyes did not smile. They wanted more than trade. They wanted advantage. Not everyone in the town was pleased. A local scientist, thin and sharp, wanted to study the metal. His hands shook slightly when he held a sample. He turned the plate and saw lines worn into it by old fires and old hands. He asked for more time, for careful study. The colonists said no. They said the metal was family and history. The scientist left with a tight jaw. He walked under lamps and tried to think of a way to learn more. That night, something moved where the cliff met the sea. A frame of metal, neat and small, sat on a rock. It did not belong to the town. A figure came with a hood and a loose coat. The figure was neither trader nor colonist. He worked fast, not noiseless, but careful. He fit the frame into a round thing hidden in the stone. The round thing opened and ate the frame like a mouth. The man looked at the face of the sea and then walked away. A watcher with a small camera caught the act. The watcher was a young boy with a net and a small radio. He liked to hide where the rocks made safe caves. He watched the shape sink into the cliff, and then he ran to the town to tell. People smiled and patted his head. They did not think it serious. Someone put the camera tape into a drawer. Life went on. Across the other side of the sea, a small ship read a signal. It was tiny, a pulse on a forgotten frequency. The message said nothing, but it had pattern and rhythm. On the ship's bridge, a man with lines on his face frowned. He pushed a button, and a screen filled with a simple map. A red dot lit. It marked the town where the colonists had landed. His lips tightened. Back in the town, a colonist named Yalin walked the narrow streets with a small tool in his pocket. He was young and quick. He laughed with boys who chased a dog, and then he paused when he saw the diplomats whisper. He kept his hands where people could see, yet he never left the crates out of sight. He walked to the hangar, where small frames waited like sleeping animals. He checked the locks and the seals, and then he smiled with low courage. At the edge of the colonist camp, someone had put a small device under a crate, a tracker, clever and tiny. It was a small square with an eye. A thief or a spy had left it there. The device woke with its own light. It sent a signal that rode the dark air. It did not speak words. It spoke pattern. The pattern moved outward and upward, like a small moth. In a far command room, a hand went to a big lever. A voice said, "That is our cue." Screens filled with ships and lines in blue dots. Men and women in uniform stood straighter. Orders ran down thin wires. A fleet that had slept for years warmed its engines. The red dot on their screen grew brighter. The town slept without knowing the watchrooms that filled with plans and maps. The diplomats praised the colonists in public and wrote different words in secret. They moved like merchants who carry knives under cloth. They saw the steel and thought of power. On a field behind the town, a small group of colonists worked late. They did not make weapons for glory. They made frames that fit together like careful puzzles. They made engines that could sing and listen. They practiced moves that looked like dances. The woman who led them stood at the center and watched her hand. She remembered the years when the colony drifted and hid. She remembered lessons taught by hunger and by danger. She spoke quietly to Yolin. "We came to live, not to conquer," she said. "But we will not lay down when others push." Yalin nodded. He checked a small map and then he locked a box. The man who had placed the tracker watched from a roof and tasted fear. He had not known the pulse would reach far alarms, he thought. He would only see the frames fit into the cliffs. Far away, the fleet began to move. Light spilled from hangars like bright insects. Orders traveled fast. The red dot on the map marked more than a place. It marked a choice. Back in the town, the colonists lit a small fire and listened to a child hum. The engines behind them hummed softer. The sea made its slow breath. Above all, the stars watched. The machines had woken. Traders spoke in low voices. Spies moved on quiet feet. The night was not done. The next morning, when the sun would lift its face, many would see the first sign of the watchers. Small ships would move, and a small fight might begin. The colonists had shown steel and caution. Others had shown hunger and worry. The first ripple had passed. A larger wave was on its way. The council sat in a room high above the sea. Light ran over walls, like water. They sat in a ring and watched the world below on long, thin screens. Their voices moved like music, many notes at once. They spoke slowly, with careful calm. "They bring tools," said one member. "They are poor. They cannot fight." His words were soft like falling leaves. Another laughed in a sound that showed small teeth. "They sell their metal for silk. They will trade and be nothing." A third voice was older and thin. It did not laugh. "Do not trust your first thought," it said. "The lost have time. They have secrets." Outside the council, stars burned in their own cold way. An officer leaned over a map and tapped the place the colonists called home. His finger made a bright mark. He remembered stories told to him as a child of burnt ships and angry skies. "They must be tested," he said. "Send a probe, learn what they hide." The council argued, and then they agreed. In the end, pride and fear made a simple choice. The probe would go. It would fly close. It would watch. It would decide if the colony posed a danger. Down below, no one knew a test would come. On the town's edge, an engineer named Mira worked alone by the cliff. She had lived with the colony for years. Her hands were quick and never careless. She'll fit metal frames together like a seamstress fits cloth. Tonight, she checked small devices, not for show, but for life. Her fingers moved over a box the size of a bread loaf. Inside it, gears slept. She touched a wire, and the gears whispered. Awake. Myra did not want war. She wanted children to run free. But she had learned a hard lesson. The sea keeps no mercy. She thought of old nights when engines failed and storms came. She thought of promises made in empty places. She set the small boxers into a line under the cliff's edge. They looked like nothing. They were simple and quiet. They listened to the sea and to the sky. At the same time, in a dark room across the bay, Yalin watched a screen. He had learned to read small lights. He watched the traders and the diplomats and the way they smiled. He had walked in foreign ports once and had seen how power hid in soft words. He kept the crates secure. He kept the frames ready. He checked a single note taped to his chest, a word in a language they kept near their mouths. Careful. The probe came like a pale bird. It split the night and made small rings in the sea. It moved slow and close. The town watched with naked eyes and with radios that hummed. Someone pointed and someone else whispered. The probe opened an eye and the town held its breath. It sent a small beam that moved over the hangars. It painted the village in white. It looked into crates and into children's rooms. It measured heat and motion and the tiny hum of machines. The probe bent its sensors like a curious child. It was careful, bright, and polite. In the command halls far away, leaders watched the images and nodded. Weak One said, "They have small things, not armies." Then the probe sent a small pulse back to the ship. It reached the distant bridge and the captain smiled. The test seemed clear. The map on their screen glowed with the word SAFE. The council breathed with relief. A small celebration began. The officers did not know that town had already begun its own quiet counting. Mira watched the probe from her cliff. She did not need to see its face to know what it wanted. She reached into the line of boxes and touched a single seam. Her hands moved with steady speed. The boxers answered with a soft hum. A small song of metal rose, low and patient. It traveled in a thin wave across the cliff and into the water. Below, the sea took the wave like a hand taking a letter. The water moved, slow and precise. A buoy shift, a light change. The ocean told a new shape what to do. Out at sea, the probe's own ears heard a strange noise. It tried to listen more closely. It turned its eye and found that sound was not what it thought. The water bent the wave. The probe's skin shivered. On the bridge where the probe's watchers sat, the screens began to flicker. Numbers that had been steady danced and then froze. The probe sent a last picture of the shore, a child pushing a cart, an old woman with a basket, a small engine leaning on a table. Then the picture went dark like a candle blown out. The dark lasted only a breath. Then the probe found itself, heavy and slow. It could not move like before. On the seas, invisible arms gripped it, without flash or fury. The probe tried to call for help. The call was thin and small. The ship that watched saw the sound and did not yet understand. A small group in the town cheered and then swallowed their joy. The farmer who had stolen a glance at a machine smiled, then bowed his head. The colonists did not shout in victory. They did not sing. They walked with a quiet that was not cold. They had made a test be an answer. Back at the council, confusion came first. Screens showed the probe drifting and then falling. One member threw a cup against a wall. They attacked. He shouted. He wanted guns and fire. He wanted a show to fix blunt things. Another voice stopped him. "We do not know," she said. "We saw a loss, not a war. We will send a small force to retrieve. Keep calm, but fear." Had new blood. The lost probe became a small wound that would not easily heal. Men and women in distant rooms never liked small losses. They called for a visible answer. Orders moved fast and hard. A small fleet stirred and lifted. The choice had been made, to learn, to punish, to own. In a quiet tent, Mira packed another seam into her hand. Yalon stood and put his tool in his pocket. The woman who had come first watched them from the high ground. Her face was calm but stern. She had not wanted this. She had told them to be careful. Now the sea had given a message, and the message would be read in many ways. The town slept badly that night. Some dreamed of bright fires and falling ships. Some dreamed of faces full of thanks. The council, far away, read reports and chose their words. They would tell the stars a story of small provocation. They would gather ships that spoke of power. On the cliffs, the boxes hummed softly. The small devices listened to the wind and to the oceans. They waited, patient and ready. The test had not gone as the council expected. The lost colony had answers hidden in small things. The first real wake of war was only beginning. Night broke open with a sound like a bell. The probe drifted slow and lonely. For a moment the sea took it like a toy. Then it burned. A white flash came where the water met metal. The probe went dark and fell. The town watched a little fire in the water and held its breath. On the distant bridge, leaders slapped the table. They struck first. A man cried. His voice was full of anger. He wanted ships and speed. Orders moved like lightning. Messengers ran. Hangars opened. Engines warmed and screamed. A small fleet turned its face to the little red dot on a map. Back on the shore, people ran to the cliffs. They wanted to see the fall. The colonists stood in two lines. Mothers held their children tight. The woman who had first stepped ashore walked with calm feet. She did not shout. Her voice was low and full. "We did not break peace," she said. "We did not call the flame. We answered what came." The first of the enemy ships moved like a slow star. It came with guns open and confidence heavy in its metal. It did not know the place. It did not know the sea. It had machines that sang a fierce tune. From high above, it threw a smaller ship down like a knife. The small ship ran close. It swept sensors and sent cold lights over hangars. The colonists had no large fleet. They had small craft, swift, strange things that could hide in fog and dance on waves. They climbed into these boats with hands that had known hunger. Their engines were tight and clever. Yalin and Mira were among them. Yalin fastened a strap and laughed once, quick and sharp. Mira checked a valve and closed her eyes for a half-breath. They did not set course to meet the first ship head-on. Instead, they used the night and the cliffs. They moved like hunters who knew the land. The enemy thought it had height and power. It did not see the nets under the waves. It did not see the frames waiting like teeth. When the first shot rang out, it sounded far. It hit a boom that rose and fell. The enemy ship did not fall. It shuddered. Its shields took the strike and threw it back. Men in the town felt the small shock in their chests. The ship tried to find the attacker. It sent drones like swift fish. The drones found no clear target. One hit a fog bank and died. Another met a line of steel that rose from the sea and folded it like paper. The colonists moved with long practice. A small craft slipped under the enemy and cut a power line. The ship's armor opened like a broken shell. Smoke rose. Men in far command rooms cursed and lit more lights. The first real strike was sharp and quick. It did not break the big ship. It did not need to. It took away its pride. It made the watchers wonder. The enemy captain ordered a wider reply. Bigger guns came alive. The sky turned bright with light. Houses shook. The town ran for cover. The colony did not answer with rage. It answered with thought. They used what they had learned in hiding. Mines folded and rose from beneath the waves and pushed against great holes. Old fishing buoys became anchors of pain. Small craft slipped in and out. The attackers found their weapons jammed by quiet tools and cunning minds. A larger ship moved in close, then slowed like a lion. It aimed at a hangar where children had painted small, bright suns on the doors. A single well-placed shot could have burned much. The colonists held their breath. At the same time, somewhere high in a glass tower, the alien emperor watched. He had great banners and many faces below him, his mouth curled with rage. He had been told the probe was lost by accident. He had been told the colony was small. Now he saw ash and smoke. He felt the loss like a cut. He wanted an answer that would be loud and final. He chose a leader to show the price. The leader would go to the town and bring proof, alive or dead. The leader was a strong one, known for speed and for cold words. He slid from his chair and took a ship smoother than silk. He promised to return with the head of the colony's bold heart. That ship came like a promise. Its hull was bright and quick. It moved over the sea and broke through the clouds. It landed near the cliff with a roar that shook stones loose. Men and women in the town watched as a being stepped out, tall, plated, and wearing both rage and careful calm. He looked at the crowd like a judge. He walked with a small guard. The sky opened with more ships ready to show power. He spoke in a language that moved like knives. He demanded the one who had struck the probe. He asked for the tool. He asked for names. The town felt the weight of his words. The colonists answered with quiet. The leader's face did not loosen. He stepped forward and pointed at a hangar. "Bring them," he said. The colonists thought the fight could fail if they met force with force. The woman who led them stepped into the open. Her voice cut the air. "Stand down," she said. "We will speak." Her voice had steel and sorrow. The leader laughed a sound like falling glass. He said, "You speak after your kind breaks. Our thing, you owe more than words." A small group of colonists moved to the hangar. They went with hands empty. The crowd watched. The leader reached as if to take one by force. He moved forward, and then the world broke. A sound full of metal came from the sky. A ship, not from the colony, strafed without warning and hit the leader's guard. The ground burst, and a red flame leaped. The leader staggered. His armor sang. Someone under him cried out. In the next breath, silence roared. The leader was gone, not dead but taken, lifted by a craft that had not been seen before. The ships above turned and vanished like ghosts. The cliff was full of smoke and questions. The leader's words hung in the air like broken glass. The Emperor's halls filled with shouts. He opened a mouth to command and found only more loss than he had planned. The galaxy had seen a bold move and a bolder reply. The leader had been taken from the very ground he'd meant to punish. That act burned in the minds of men on many bridges. From a hidden place the colonists watched and waited. They had not planned to take a leader. They had not planned to make a king lose face. Yet the act had happened. The rulers would not let this pass. Orders ran like wildfire back to the Empire. A voice called for retribution and for a war that would show the cost of small hands that strike. Fleets would gather. Lines would be drawn. The town breathed under a sky that had just learned new rules. On the cliff, the woman who had come first knelt and touched the ground where the leader had stood. Her hands were not steady. She felt the weight of the choice that lay before her. Behind her, Yalan and Mira checked their small craft. They understood the night had moved from test to fight. Far away, the Emperor tightened his fist. He would answer, he vowed. He would change maps and names. The stars leaned in and listened. The first answer had been given. The next would be louder. The sky was full of fire that morning. Ships moved like dark birds. The sea broke into white teeth. People ran in towns and on cliffs. Children held tight to mothers. Old men watched with tired eyes. The world had obeyed the first answers. Now, it would hear the next. The colonists stood ready in the hangar. Yalan checked straps and tightened a bolt. Myra ran her hands over an engine and listened to its small heart. The woman who had first come ashore stood above them on the hill. Her face had a new line. She looked at the horizon where the empires drew breath. Her voice was steady. "We protect our home," she said. "We do not want to break more than we must." They did not have many ships. They had cunning and tight machines. Their crew knew the cliffs and the storms. They knew where the sea gave up its secrets. They knew how to move without being seen. The Empire brought numbers. It brought heavy steel and wide guns. The first wave moved in long lines, like a storm that planned to drown the shore. The battle started not with a roar, but with a quiet. Small craft slipped through fog and under radar. They crept into the spaces the big ships forgot. A single strike hit a power line and lights died for a block. A mine rose like a sleeping fish and bit the hull of a destroyer. The big guns opened, and bright ribbons of fire crossed the sea. Houses shook, and glass sang above. The Emperor watched like a man closing his fist. He gave orders that made whole fleets turn. Flags burned in the wind. The Empire's leaders wanted a clear win. They wanted the colonists to know their place. But the colonists had a different kind of plan. They had made traps that looked like no danger. They had given the sea things that rose at the right moment. They fought with small losses and sharp hits. The first great moment came at dusk. A large flagship tried to crush the hangar where children had once painted suns. It lifted a gun and aimed. The town held its breath. Mira gave a sign. Yalan took the lead and ran their craft forward like a bird breaking from a tree. Other small ships darted in a ribbon. They did not crash into the flagship. They cut lines and found weak spots. The flagship lost balance and drifted. Its guns could not find a clear target. The sea took one of its engines in a neat strike. Men on its deck fell silent. The Empire felt shock. They had planned to strike fear. Instead, their pride broke into pieces. New orders flew. Bigger forces joined. The sky filled with more ships. The town burned in places and children cried. Yet the colonists did not break. They saved what they could. They pulled families behind cliffs and used hidden tunnels. They used old knowledge to move people like water. When the battle reached its peak, the woman who led the colony faced a choice. A large strike could end many ships. It could also end a town across the bay that had no part in the war. The Empire had hidden civilians there too. Her generals looked to her. The choice was simple in truth, but heavy in life. She could press the advantage and let the strike finish the fleet. She could also try a daring move that saved many but cost a vital tool. She chose a hard mercy. She gave the order that would save the town across the bay. Yolan stared. Mira's hands shook for a breath. The colonists would pull a device from their stores and use it in a way it was not meant to be used. It would stop a great gun for a moment, long enough to move people. The device would not be the same after. They would lose the thing they had guarded so long, but the town would live. The device fired in a low, awful sound. It burned its own life to hush a gun. A great beam fell silent in the sky. The flagship's rage found nothing. 1,000 men who had hoped to strike and break were suddenly without their best tool. The Empire's plan stumbled. The shock moved through ranks like a cold. Across the bay the saved town shouted and sang. The people did not know the cost. They only saw that slaughter had stopped. They ran in the streets and kissed ground. The colonists watched from a distance and felt both relief and loss. The woman touched the empty place where the device had been. It was heavy in her hands, though it was gone. The Empire burned with new anger. Some leaders called for total war. Some spoke of shame and pride. Others whispered for negotiation. In the chaos, smaller voices rose who had seen the colonists' mercy and felt something like respect. Old enemies in the Empire began to doubt the cost of a full campaign. In the quiet after the battle, both sides counted their dead. The colonists buried friends, and they mended what they could. The town healed wounds slowly. The sea took, and the wind returned. The woman who led them walked among graves and handed tools to those who needed work to survive. She told Yolan and Mira, "We will make a home. We will keep our hands clean when we can." Then, as the sky went gray and the stars returned to their places, the colonists did a small, brave thing. They built a tall beacon on the highest cliff. It was made of steel and lights and the pieces of the device they had burned. It was not a weapon. It was a signal. It sang slow and clear. It sent a pattern into the dark beyond the moons. The pattern said a simple thing: "We are here." It also said, "We will keep what is ours." Ships in distant lanes turned their paths to watch the new light. Some came with small flags of peace. Others whispered of revenge. The beacon was a new voice in the old maps. As the first dawn after the battle rose, children played near repaired walls. Old men fixed nets and spoke quietly. Yalan and Mira stood with the woman and watched the sea. Their faces were tired but steady. The colony had won a strange thing, a day of hard peace and a new kind of danger. The stars had noticed human steel. The stars remembered now, far away, in rooms of glass and banners. The Emperor slammed his hand against a table and said nothing. He had lost face and lost men. He would answer, he swore. But not all who stood with him wanted the same answer. The map of the Empire had lines that might change. On the cliff, the beacon blinked once more. A child picked up a small shard of steel and held it to the light. He smiled and looked up. The woman who had led them put her hand on the child's shoulder. She did not know what the next sign would bring. She only knew one truth. They had returned with steel. They had kept their home. The stars had taken notice, and the story of that notice had only just begun.